Welcome to Soulivity.com's passion-driven interviews with founder Brian Wesley Johnson. Each of these carefully curated interviews is all about supporting you and getting inspired to live your best life today. So let's get started. Here's Brian. You know, we've got a great show for you tonight, so I am so excited to get it started. You know, when I was thinking about this show, I was thinking about these guest interviews. You know, there's such an, inspiring group of courageous people. They really have the audacity to step out of their well-paved and planned out lives, either created by social conditioning, job descriptions, or traditional roles. They acknowledged this internal disturbance as a call to action and to change by integrating and embracing a more authentic version of themselves. They literally had the audacity to dream and say yes to their soul's calling. These interviews have taught me this: continue to grow and ask questions, use curiosity as a discovery tool, explore and embrace sides of you that were banished from social conditioning, self-doubt, fear, and self-recrimination. When you integrate all of who you are and embody your authentic self, you become an extraordinarily best expression of possibility and potential. So tonight we welcome filmmaker Crystal McCrary, who embodies these important sentiments. Throughout her entire life, she has sought to embrace all of the possibilities of her life, leading her to be all that she is meant to be and even more. As an award-winning film and TV producer and director, she has brought to the world the stories that needed to be told, which includes the important men and women of color who impact the world in a myriad of significant ways. Her impressive list of success includes original programming for TV and film, including HOMECOURT ADVANTAGE, GOTHAM DIARIES, Inspiration: Profiles of Black Women Changing Our World, the independent film Dirty Laundry for Fox Films, and the NAACP Image Award nominated BET documentary series, Leading Women and Leading Men. In February of 2015, she directed and produced the feature-length documentary Little Ballers, which premiered on Nickelodeon Sports. She also produced and directed Nickelodeon Sports series Little Ballers Indiana with WNBA All-Star Skylar Diggins, which premiered in March 2017. So with all of this, and with the importance of doing what you love to do, we welcome Crystal McCrary to the show. Let's get her live. Wow. Hey, Crystal, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am so honored to have you on the show.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. We made it happen.
Girl, those successes were a long list to read. I want to remind everyone that we love questions. So if you have any during the show, just post them right here to this live feed and we'll get to as many of them as we possibly can. So Crystal, I really want the community to get a sense of your journey to where you are today. And if it's okay, let's start where it all began. Where is your hometown?
Detroit, like yours.
And
fellow Detroiter.
Exactly. Can you paint a little picture of how life was, back then? I mean, we grew up in downtown Detroit. And so what was life for you?
I didn't really realize what it was like, obviously from a retrospective perspective, until I became an adult. But as I've often looked back and reflected on Detroit, what always comes to mind is it reminded me of growing up in a mini United Nations. And I grew up in downtown Detroit in the 70s and 80s. And it was really quite revolutionary when you think about where we are today as a country. And so having grown up in Michigan, in downtown Detroit, where I was surrounded by every ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, you name it. That was what I grew up around, and having a multicultural environment just seemed normal to me.
Right, right. Did it feel though too that though it was multicultural, you also were given the legacy and the history of people of color as well as something that was not separate and apart, but also equal and as important to everybody else? Was that also true?
Well, sure. I was raised, by my maternal grandparents who are like my parents. I call them mom and dad. I mean, they are my mom and dad.
Yeah.
And they grew up during the Depression in Detroit. So they grew up in, a Jim Crow, Michigan during the 30s. I mean, they migrated from the South, but they both landed in Detroit, Michigan in the early 1930s. And so it was still Jim Crow, still didn't have the right to vote for Black folks. Women really didn't vote. I mean, the suffrage movement had occurred, but Black women weren't voting. Right. But they were incredibly hardworking, always impressed the importance of education. My mom was a school teacher in the Detroit public schools when it was 40 kids in a classroom with one teacher.
I remember.
And then she became a principal. My dad worked for Ford Motor Company, World War II veteran. We were the American dream.
Yeah.
You have a good job, you can buy a home, a car, send your kids to a great school, go on a vacation, and just appreciate and love your family. And so my parents weren't big activists. That was not the environment. I mean, they were not of the era. They're a little older. My father passed away a few years ago. My mom, she's still alive. She's 92.
Wow.
92 years old, yeah. So she didn't grow up in the era of the 60s where at that point she was already established in her career. And so her civil rights movement, if you will, was getting an education. Right. And being able to make her own choices because she got an education, and excellence and lifting up others. That was what they showed us, my sister and I, as an example.
It's definitely that they showed you, because you went off and really excelled in school. I mean, you went to University of Michigan, you went to law school. But before you went into undergrad, there was an important moment for you. You received a book. What was the name of that book? Do you remember?
Oh, yes. The Brian Lanker book. Oh, gosh. And I was inspired by that book to do my book, Inspiration Profiles of Black Women Changing Our World. I dream a world.
There you go.
I dream a world. And that sense of possibility.
Give us a little more on that. I mean, you received this book and, it seemed as though this was transformational for you. It opened up some things. What did it open up for you?
Well, sure. I mean, first of all, just the photography was unlike anything I had ever seen in a book. I wasn't, my family, they were not art collectors. We went to, museums, but I received this book as a graduation present from my mom, Sorer, she's a Delta, Mrs. Swanson, also a Detroit public school teacher. And I just remember being blown away by the raw artistry of these photos and the different types of images and representations of women of color. Not as if I hadn't seen professional women in my neighborhood, or in my, just my environment. I mean, I had, teachers, lawyers, doctors, architects, etc. in my family, but it broadened that world. It took me outside of Detroit. It took me outside of Michigan. It took me to, Planned Parenthood, Toni Morrison. I mean, I'm trying to think with it was Faye who was there at the time at Planned Parenthood, but just the women that he chose to profile were really trailblazers in a way that I just had not seen, at least in a book. So proud.
It's funny that it seemed like your world just expanded.
Yes.
And it seemed like that expansion followed you through college, through, graduate school, and you found yourself in Paris, right?
Yeah. So when I was in law school, I studied, I spent a semester in Paris, and I studied European community law.
Wow.
Which I must admit, I enjoyed Paris, but I did not enjoy that European community law.
Paris was why you were supposed to go, just for be in Paris, yes. Not for the other stuff, to be there. Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about this turn, because you're an accomplished attorney, and then it seemed as though you had a calling. Mm-hmm. And that you started to do more around the arts. How did you find yourself there? What was it, something that you saw, or was it something that was always there and you were always kind of working?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a generous characterization to say I was an accomplished attorney, because I was at an amazing law firm in New York City with certainly top lawyers, but I was there physically. But my heart wasn't really there, because I knew that I truly wanted to have a creative profession. I loved writing. I mean, that was my, first creative love. And I knew that I wanted to have a career writing, but what I didn't have in my family or as actual role models was anybody who'd had a career in the arts. We were a very practical stock. You're going to get your education, you're going to get a job, you're going to stay in it, you're going to get health insurance, and
make a little money, right, put some money in the savings.
Yeah, which is great.
Yeah.
But I just wanted something more, and so I had several turning points, and I had so many explosions of growth while I was at Paul Weiss. That's the firm in New York City that I worked for. Mm-hmm. That it was like 1,000-fold. I mean, everything was a lesson for me. I'm living in New York City. Yeah. I'm living right in the heart of the city. I'm walking to work, and I'm meeting all of these, attorneys and clients that are playwrights, that are choreographers, that are directors, that are authors, right, and actors, and each of them, I was able to see, that they had, not to sound cliche, but they had a dream.
Yeah.
They set themselves forward on a path to achieve this dream, and various types of roadmaps of how one could have a creative career began to emerge for me.
Wow.
And that took several forms of how I chose to educate myself. I knew I hadn't gone to film school. I hadn't gone and gotten, a master's, an MFA. Mm-hmm. So I knew that I needed to educate myself, and I was thirsty for knowledge. I was really, really, really thirsty for knowledge. So I started reading books about writing fiction. I started reading books about, charting a creative path. I mean, The Artist's Way. Everybody knows about the book, The Artist's Way. I read that. I read the book Story by Robert McKee, and I took his screenwriting seminar over a 4-day weekend. and I just, bird by bird, turning, life into fiction. And I really immersed myself into how I could teach myself different techniques of writing. And then I started exercising. I mean, the exercises I did came from the artist's way. And I started these things called morning pages, and I wrote 3 pages every morning for 6 months. And that evolved actually into my first novel.
Wow.
HOMECOURT ADVANTAGE.
Do you consider yourself a storyteller?
I do. Yes, I do consider myself a storyteller. I don't feel like I have enough time to tell as many stories as I want to tell now.
Right.
I mean, now flash forward, gosh, 22 years. It's hard to believe it was that long ago that I first started at the firm and first started. But flash forward, I have 3 kids, 3 different schools, 3 different ages, and I still work. But my original love of writing fiction, I have not had as much time as I would like to have for that, But I got into other forms of creating art, documentary series, which was another form of storytelling. Feature films, another form of storytelling.
Right. Why are the stories that you tell so important to you?
Well, they're important for many reasons. I think on the most guttural level, they're important because I feel like I have to create.
Okay.
I draw, like if I have periods, like I kind of go through a down period when I finished a project, when I've turned it in, and in every phase of it, I'm like, oh, what next? And even though I always have something in the fire, I miss that process of creating.
Right.
So I create because I must.
Who you are, right?
Right.
It's who you are.
Right.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, and then the stories that I tell, why are they important for me to tell? There are a number of reasons they're important. I feel not that my stories are going to, affect people 100 years from now, 200 years from now, but I certainly try to approach my storytelling in the types of characters I choose to profile or create with a level of integrity, and showing characters and stories that have an element of justice to them, quashing stereotypes, showing complexity. Particularly, I explored that quite a bit, actually, in my film Little Ballers, which was really important to me in the film Little Ballers, which is the Nickelodeon documentary that I did, to show Black fathers being present for their sons. Right.
Which most people would think is the opposite based upon, again, the stereotypes and all that. But when you statistically look at it, it's actually the reverse.
Right.
So it seems as though part of what you're trying to create is actually something that you've already experienced, and that is you want to bring the authentic forward, right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
How did the project come out? How did Little Ballers come to you? How did it
come to be?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when I got the idea to make Little Ballers, I had been working on the BET shows that I created, that I co-created with one of my wonderful partners. I've had so many, that's another thing, I've had so many great creative partners.
That matters a lot, right? It matters.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But we had the show Leading Women, which profiled women of color who've impacted the country socially, politically, artistically. And we did Leading Men and profiled so many extraordinary women from Maya Angelou to Iman We profiled Hill Harper, Wynton Marsalis. And so I was working on that series and a couple other shows that I was doing. I did the show My Two Cents. I did this show with the model Eva, the top model Eva. And my son at the time, my 17-year-old son, was playing basketball on an AAU team. That's Amateur Athletic Union team. And I was team mom. You know, by default. I hadn't volunteered for that position, but it just came to be. All the kids would come to our house for sleepovers. And so I was always with this diverse group of boys who, but for basketball, their paths would not have crossed. They were all from very different backgrounds. It was chance, it was serendipity. And I just found that although they were deeply passionate about basketball, what was more interesting to me was them coming together from different worlds and how they uplifted each other and brought each other hope as friends. And so I said, let me put a camera on and see what I get. And so that's how it was born.
Wow. So again, bringing the authentic forward. Right? This community of boys that you would never see together, and you put it on film. Is that success also brought you a second documentary film? Did Nickelodeon come back to you? Or for Little Ballers Indiana? How did that all come about?
They wanted me. The first Little Ballers did really well for them, and they wanted to do another one. And so they wanted to change the format slightly. The second one I did in partnership with them from the very beginning. The first Little Ballers I had done independently, no buyer, no studio. I did it independently with the former NBA player Amari Stoudemire and the artist, rapper Lupe Fiasco. They were my partners on the first Little Ballers. And so we were able to do it. And I took it on the film festival circuit, did screenings, and Nickelodeon emerged as a buyer on that. So the second Little Ballers Indiana, they felt it was better to do as a series, 3 half-hour episodes. Because just they found that their demographic responded better to shorter format.
Gotcha. It was successful. I mean, again, you following your path, just, these doors started to open up, because I guess I look at it like Oprah says, the flow, right? You're in the flow and you're doing what you're supposed to do. And then these things start happening and start coming.
Yes.
We were talking about before we were doing this interview, we were kind of like talking about different things. You've got some pretty amazing new projects that you're doing. Tell us a little bit about those.
Yes. So one of the major, or the primary new project that I'm working on that's going to take up most of my time, I'll be able to do other projects, but this one, let me just first start by saying this. There's a woman, an extraordinary tour de force businesswoman who asked me to come on this project.
Wow.
Who has committed herself to being inclusive and to elevating women and giving women opportunities for projects that they have been denied for several decades.
Wow.
And so I have to just start from there. I mean, she is a powerhouse.
All right.
And I will say that the last few projects that I've worked on have been extraordinary women that have come together. And, I've partnered, for instance, with Morgan Stanley on a book, on a couple of films, on a series. And it's a woman up in Morgan Stanley who has reached out and wanted to create these partnerships. I mean, we are all taking our candle and lighting everybody's candle, and it's just getting brighter. So back to the current project. So I have signed, I can't divulge too much about it,
Of course.
other than to say I'll be in Los Angeles working on it for back and forth between New York and Los Angeles, working on it for like the next couple of years.
All right.
And it's groundbreaking.
Wow. Wow. And a new book?
Yes. I am working on a new novel. And then I actually have a sequel for one of my other books, which I have to come back and share a little more with you.
Absolutely.
About that.
You see, you beat me to it. I was going to say, girl, you have to come back.
I would love to. I would love to. So it's an exciting time. It's a hopeful time.
Yeah.
You know.
Speaking of hope, with all that you've experienced, and also as you being a mother, to the people who have children, or if there was a child in front of you right now, what would you say to them about living their life, their journey? What words of inspiration, empowerment, what would you say to that person, that child?
Oh gosh, there's so more. But one thing I would say, put down your phones and read more. Get off of social media.
Right. I think all the parents are like, yeah.
Read more books, educate yourself, remain intellectually curious, reject this soundbite way of communicating. That's something that is really important to me. And then I have, all sorts of specific advice, but having 2 teenagers and then also a 5-year-old, I realize that it's incredibly important, particularly in this era of social media, for our teens. I mean, there's some positive about it, but there's a lot of negative because there's so many shortcuts that they take to getting information, and I think it's addictive.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, look at just social media for these kids. They don't have to fully engage and interact on a humanistic level with each other.
Right.
They can turn off the phone and, I don't want to talk to you, and just that kind of thing. And that's not communing, right? It's not communing with each other.
It's scary. I had a conversation with the head of my daughter's school, and he was telling me how the studies that they're doing now, they're discovering that this communication and short speak, like texting and abbreviations for everything, appeals to the less evolved part of one's brain.
Yes. And
that's taking us intellectually backwards.
Yes. What is it? By a certain age, to progress, you have to have 300,000 words in your vocabulary. But how do you get there if you're in these limited?
Right. TTYL, OMH,
wow,
OMG, SMH. You see, I know them. I'm guilty too.
On another, I just want to ask you this one little question before we wrap up, because I think with everything that's happening in Florida, and again, we're both parents, and
children the age of the
that were there. I hear, on the one hand, we get on our teenagers about social media,
sure,
but then on the other hand, here are these teenagers that have mobilized on their own, and are taken to the streets. There was a bus tonight going up to Tallahassee,
right, where they said they weren't even going to vote. The state legislature wouldn't even vote on eliminating assault rifles.
Wow. What is your feelings about all that, about what's happening down there?
Well, I think the way that the extraordinarily articulate and courageous and heartbroken teenagers in Parkland, Florida, the way that they are using social media and mobilizing is the best possible way that you can use it, because they're really using it for change. They're using it to send out a message of stop this madness. Sensible gun control is something that should be from the top down. It should be put into effect. And we've turned into a nation that, first of all, the Second Amendment, you're going to bring out the lawyer in me, the whole notion that everybody has the right to bear arms. Well, you know, the Second Amendment said a well-armed militia. And then that's where all sorts of debate comes in. Well, that means the people, well-armed militia as well, if there was an uprising and they needed to protect themselves. But I'm sure that the framers of the Constitution, when they wrote the Second Amendment, they were not envisioning a 17-year-old, 18, however old that thing was, going into the school and shooting them up with an AR-15. That's not what was envisioned. And something is really broken and really problematic. I don't know, I think you may follow me on Instagram, but I had a post not too long ago where I talked about how the US is roughly 5% of the global population, but yet we own 46% of guns.
Right.
What does that say about us as a society?
Right.
And Sandy Hook didn't change it. It didn't change after Columbine, although they used weapons besides guns, but it didn't change after Vegas. And I'm hopeful that it will finally change with these teenagers who do have social media to spread their message. I'm particularly disheartened that there are truthers out there already trying to say, oh, they're fake. These teenagers are crisis actors. I mean, that's how bananas things are right now, because it starts from the top down. And since news has been called fake and all of our intelligence agencies have been, someone's attempting to discredit them, it makes it more and more challenging. So we will be led by a child.
Well, I mean, what's the saying, out of the mouth of babes, right?
Yes, that's right.
I think maybe what you're doing as an example of being authentic, saying and doing what you mean, and the reverse of that, and letting these children see that example and say, okay, well, I believe in this and I think this is wrong. And instead of me hiding behind my mobile phone, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to say something. I'm going to do something. And they start to experience who it is that they were meant to be. All of they were meant to be.
Absolutely.
So, Crystal, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I mean, everyone, we're going to have Crystal back.
Absolutely.
Don't make me come to New York and grab you.
Oh, I would love to. I will say this, check out my Legal Defense Fund documentary. I did not mention that, which is the Legal Defense Fund, which was founded by Thurgood Marshall. And they're headed now by Sherilyn Eiffel, and they are on the front lines of civil rights legal work.
We will make sure we get all the information from you so that people can, get it educated and inspired, get some wisdom, so that they can be all that they were meant to be. Again, Crystal, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And again, we'll have Crystal back soon on our show. Well, with that, I'm going to say this is Brian Wesley Johnson, thanking each and every one of you for joining us tonight. We want to thank you for watching Soulivity.com's passion-driven interviews with founder Brian Wesley Johnson. From celebrities to best-selling authors, Soulivity.com is all about inspiring you to live your dreams and create your best life today. We invite you to listen to our other fantastic interviews with new ones available every single week. Please also visit soulivity.com and start your journey toward your passion, your purpose, and higher quality living. See you next time.
This work is subject to copyright owned by Affinity Global LLC. Any reproduction or republication of all or part of this audio is expressly prohibited unless Affinity Global LLC has explicitly granted its prior written consent. All other rights reserved.